Hey guys, and welcome to today's video where we are going to be talking about wellness content and wellness influences and how that content, whilst pushing an agenda of health, can actually be really toxic. And I want to preface this by saying, obviously, this does not apply to all wellness influencers. Not every piece of wellness content is going to have some kind of bad side to it, but I've seen a few things that have made me go, so I decided to make a video looking a little bit deeper into it. So before we start, make sure you are subscribed down below, notifications on, and don't forget to leave a like on this video if you do go on to enjoy it. To start off, let's talk about what the online wellness community actually is, because wellness is a very broad term that could include anything from someone providing a free fitness plan to someone on TikTok telling you to drink more water. And wellness is a subset of lifestyle content and the general aim of the content is to show people how to live a healthier lifestyle. Often wellness influencers will promote a particular diet or exercise plan, offer recipe and nutrition advice, and document things like meditation and journaling as a way to show the general public how they can improve their mental and their physical health. And it's worth noting now that the majority of wellness influencers do not come from a medical or science background. Most of them are preaching about whatever routine they've discovered that works for them. So their advice is coming from personal experience rather than from education on this subject. And the term wellness was popularized originally in the 1950s by Dr. Halbert L. Dunn, who described the principle behind his ideas as a condition of change in which the individual moves forward, climbing towards a higher potential of functioning. And he drew a distinction between good health, the absence of illness or passive state of homeostasis, and wellness as an active, ongoing pursuit. And whilst good health is objective, it's dictated by modern medicine, Dunn's wellness was subjective, based on perception and what the individual felt and thought about themselves. And wellness culture as we know it now originated from 1960s America, where groups who we'd now probably refer to as hippies started to experiment with mind-altering drugs, living close to nature, and Eastern mysticism. And the aim of the movement was to advocate for being your own guru and taking it into your own hands to make your life better and more fulfilling. And wellness was centered around three pillars: individualism, commitment to self-optimization, and distrust of modern medicine, usually achieved through extreme diet and exercise routines which were designed to avoid illness and death for as long as possible. And before long, there were many different types of wellness that developed, from exercise crazes, diet trends, and spa tourism, which were all designed with the idea of improving the mind and body in some way. And nowadays, the wellness industry as a whole is worth over $3.7 trillion as of 2015, so it's probably closer to $5 trillion now. And most of the wellness content that we come across is from big-name celebrities or influencers. A-listers like Gwyneth Paltrow and Jennifer Aniston have preached about wellness, with Gwyneth Paltrow's brand Goop being infamous for its weird and wacky wellness products. And many influencers have delved into the world of wellness in one way or another, whether it be by taking a skinny tea sponsorship or by posting a skincare routine. Both of those types of content would fall into the wellness umbrella because they focus on individual self-improvement. And the concept of looking within oneself in order to identify the toxic parts of your lifestyle and cut them out with the goal of improving overall health sounds pretty sensible, and it sounds pretty noble actually, because a solid wellness routine requires a high level of self-discipline and upkeep. However, the proliferation of wellness content and wellness influencers has actually, in my opinion, caused more of a detriment than a good. So let's discuss why. So to start off the conversation about the toxic side of wellness culture online, I want to ask you a question. What qualities of a person would indicate that they are at peak wellness? Obviously, I can't see and hear your answer. If I could, then I would be making my millions as a psychic rather than working a 9 to 5. But I would hazard a guess that for a lot of people, online wellness culture has influenced them to associate wellness with being thin, being toned, being organized, eating healthy, eating particularly green foods, and exercising often. When we think of peak wellness, we think of the aesthetic of peak wellness rather than the feelings of peak wellness. And this is because the wellness industry, at the heart of it, is one of the most superficial industries to exist. The entire influencer industry is very superficial, particularly when it comes to Instagram. Like, if you're not pretty, you're not going to be an influencer. And wellness influencers are no different to that. I'm trying to move my hair so you can see that I'm actually like wearing something and I'm not just like filming a video completely naked. So at its core, we understand wellness nowadays to be being the best version of yourself possible, because there are so many aspects of wellness that when they all kind of come together, that's what they form. But in order for someone to become an influencer in this space, they have to present something that is aspirational to their followers. So they can't just be kind of an ordinary person who goes to the gym like 3 times a week, eats a fairly healthy diet and lives a fairly happy, normal life. Like, that's not aspirational to people. That's not going to inspire people. So in the vast majority of cases, what an influencer will present to their followers is a perfect lifestyle. But one particular aspect that people seem to focus on is diet and body shape. And the most recent iteration of this that I'll use as an example to illustrate my point is the that girl trend that took over TikTok in 2022, where people were showing off their like wellness routines or their peak wellness through things like waking up early, not using their phones, exercising every day, having a 20-step skincare routine, having an organization chart, eating only clean foods, and the list kind of goes on and on. And one thing that all of these aspirational content creators who were getting a lot of views had in common was that they're all skinny. And most of them don't actually divulge any information about how being that girl has actually helped them in any way, apart from getting more views on TikTok for having an aesthetically pleasing life. And here's a hot take on the that girl videos. Only drinking a coffee or a smoothie for breakfast is not healthy. Only eating no more than 1,000 calories a day is not healthy. This is not encouraging wellness. This is encouraging dangerous dieting. But because it's presented in an aesthetic way, it makes people aspire to that lifestyle and be as in tune with their wellness as this creator is, rather than recognize that the way that that person is living is actually not healthy. This side of wellness is really just a repackaging of toxic diet culture of the 90s and the 2000s, because it's presented under the umbrella of wellness, it's harder to recognize that it's still just as toxic as it was back then. The wellness industry presents wellness as something that is entirely within your control, ignoring individual factors like socioeconomic conditions, working hours, illness, mental health problems, etc., that would impact on a person's ability to do a lot of these things that are presented as being like the pinnacle of wellness. For example, if you are working 12-hour days to make ends meet, you likely are not going to have enough time to go to the gym 5 times a week. And if you're a parent, you probably won't have the time in the morning to do a 20-step skincare routine and an hour of meditation. But the industry completely ignores this. And often diet is the one thing that people with other limiting factors in their life will turn to in order to improve their wellness, because diet is the easiest thing to control. Obviously, diet is still limited by some factors, such as how much money you've got and what food outlets and supermarkets are available to you. But for the most part, diet is easier to take control of than exercise and mindfulness habits, because everyone has to eat every single day. Whereas exercise and mindfulness are more kind of like optional side modes. And because of the focus placed on individual control in wellness, you are told that you and only you are responsible for achieving wellness. People who want to improve their wellness often become very self-critical. They become perfectionists because they feel like they are not doing enough if they are not perfect, particularly now that wellness content online is so widespread and that content is designed to show you how other people are living the perfect life, which presents that lifestyle as an achievable goal. And this self-criticism, this self-pressure to take control is what can potentially lead people into a spiral of toxic dieting and eating disorders, because online content is telling them that in order to achieve wellness, they have to eat less. So a lot of times eating disorders develop because food is something that the person who suffers from the disorder can control, where other aspects of their life feel kind of hopelessly outside of their control. So when influencers are pushing you to do what they're doing in order to achieve wellness, but the only part of their life that you're able to recreate is their diet, it makes that consumer of that content more vulnerable to falling into toxic dieting in pursuit of their wellness goals. And this also ties in with the fat phobia that is rife in modern society. People fear weight gain and they criticize those who are overweight for being unhealthy or unattractive. And wellness culture only furthers this, because all wellness influencers are either slim or are not slim and get a ton of hate from their followers about how they can't possibly be healthy if they're not slim. And the hyper-focus that wellness places on individual responsibility subtly promises to eliminate insecurities about things like weight without actually tackling the basis for the insecurity, which only kind of further breeds fat phobia, because they're telling you you should be afraid of being fat, you shouldn't be fat because you're unhealthy, and in order to be well, you can't be overweight. And it just reinforces societal beauty standards and that fear of weight gain. And wellness will tell you that if you're overweight and insecure, that's your fault. And you need to be the one to do something about it. Where in reality, people are overweight for a number of different reasons, from genetics to eating as a trauma response to chronic health issues or having to take certain medicines. And placing blame on everyone for their weight, which for some people is an insecurity, is not going to do anyone any good and is only going to further crush the self-esteem of people who do have that insecurity. And wellness influencers want to appeal to the widest proportion of society possible, so they will use inclusive language. They'll say things like, wellness is for everyone, anyone can start their wellness journey, wellness can be improved at home, so it's really accessible. But actually, the image of wellness is very exclusive to those who are able to live the aesthetically pleasing life. And if you don't see results immediately from following that influencer's lifestyle recommendations, the self-blame culture of wellness will tell you that it's because you're failing in some way. You're not trying hard enough, or you're not doing it right. And there's no mention of the fact that well-being is highly individual, and therefore a generic fitness plan or healthy diet is not going to work for everyone, and no account is taken of mitigating factors that will influence your ability to follow an influencer's recommendations to a T. And this feeling of guilt for not getting the desired result in the perpetuated time frame will only push people into more and more extreme routines, which is what breeds eating disorders and excessive exercise, which is not just unhealthy but also dangerous. And often the people who are the most susceptible to wellness content online are those who are suffering from chronic illness, or those who have recently recovered from a particularly difficult illness such as cancer, who are looking at ways of taking back control of their body from whatever illness they have or had. I also think particular countries have grabbed onto wellness more than others, especially countries that don't have free universal healthcare, simply because holistic alternative medicine and spirituality are a whole lot cheaper than traditional medicine. In the USA, for example, a chronic illness that requires regular hospital appointments and prescribed medicine over a long period, sometimes a person's entire life, would cost millions of dollars without health insurance. And even with insurance, the premium on the insurance is going to be huge because they know they're going to be paying out a lot of money on your behalf. Whereas alternative medicine, in comparison, costs only a fraction of that and can be done at home without needing the oversight of a qualified doctor. And this is part of the reason why developed countries like the USA are still very vulnerable to the trappings of the wellness industry. But actually, whilst the chronically ill are the most vulnerable to wellness content, the wellness industry itself and wellness influencers in particular are actually making content that inadvertently shames people with illnesses or disabilities that prevent them from going to the extremes that a lot of influencers push you to go to in order to reach peak wellness. Wellness content and wellness influencers need to not only inspire people who are already interested in wellness, but also those who aren't yet interested in wellness. So their content is often presented with an air of kind of superiority, of I live a better life than anyone else because I've invested time in wellness. Look at the perfect life that this influencer lives as a result of investing in their wellness, whilst you're sitting at home envying that lifestyle instead of living it. And this superiority is supposed to kind of guilt you into feeling like you need to follow that influencer in order to do what they're doing and achieve their lifestyle. And this in turn makes the whole industry inherently ableist. The people most vulnerable to wellness are the ones looking for an element of control, where in other parts of their life they don't have it, such as if they're limited by a disability. But the wellness solutions that most influencers offer are not realistic for people who have disabilities. A few examples of things that are regularly peddled as staples for wellness are waking up early, eating only clean foods, doing yoga, being super thin and toned, having clean skin, which a lot of those things just are not feasible for people who are physically limited in some way. If your body is actively fighting some kind of disease, you're likely to be more tired and more hungry than the average person in your day-to-day because your body has less natural energy that it can make available to you to do daily tasks. And as such, spending 3 hours in the gym a day and doing yoga is not possible. And waking up at 5 a.m. is not possible unless you want to be asleep by 5 p.m. And if you have a physical disability, again, exercise is going to be a lot more difficult, and as such, you're not going to be able to achieve that peak physical fitness as easily. But wellness content doesn't account for this, and the superiority complex that a lot of wellness influencers put forward to their followers just ends up shaming people who are unable to do those things. And this superiority complex is reflective of the overall message of individual responsibility that we talked about previously, and as such, wellness content essentially blames illness on the ill. A lot of wellness gurus will tell you that by drinking a particular water that is full of nutrients and eating a particular diet, they have strengthened their immune system and thus cannot get sick, which inadvertently pushes the blame for sickness onto the people who are sick by saying that they're just not doing enough for their own wellness and that's why they're ill. In a way, this blame placed on ill people is almost a way for people who are very invested in wellness to seek comfort for the fact that there are things that are outside of their control and always will be. If you convince yourself that kale cures cancer, and as such, eating kale every day means you'll never get cancer, it makes the world a lot less scary to navigate. You never have to worry about suffering from that terminal illness because you've taken all the necessary steps to prevent it. They believe that they will never suffer because they have control over that part of their life as a result of investing in wellness. This obviously is not correct. Whilst there are things that you can do to lower your risk of certain illnesses, you can never completely eliminate the risk because a lot of the time the cause of it is genetics, not lifestyle. And even if you'd eaten all the kale in the world, you still would have ended up getting cancer. However, this doesn't stop people seeking comfort in those beliefs and pushing them onto others, particularly those who are vulnerable and desperate for some kind of control over the illness that dictates their life. And wellness content often thrives on amazing stories of people overcoming particular challenges or illnesses as a result of switching to a healthier lifestyle, the same lifestyle that they're now trying to sell to people. However, these stories are not always true and for the most part seem to be either exaggerated or partly made up in order to oversell the influence of what a switch in lifestyle can do in terms of overcoming a barrier. And one infamous example of this is the case of Belle Gibson, who was arguably the queen bee of wellness content in the mid-2010s and had hundreds of thousands of followers around the globe who were in awe of her amazing story. So her story was that she was diagnosed with terminal cancer and told that she was only going to have 4 months to live. But miraculously, through alternative medicine and eating healthy, managed to extend her lifespan, avoid chemotherapy, and live the life that any person in their 20s would be living if they did not have cancer. And she was slowly helping to heal her body in natural ways without having to go through invasive treatments. And she built an audience of 300,000 on Instagram, which back in 2013, that was a huge number of followers for an influencer to have. And many of those people who followed her were also struggling with cancer or other terminal or chronic illnesses and were inspired by her story, her openness about her health, and her positivity throughout her illness. So she had a website, an app, and a book called The Whole Pantry, which provided her followers with the recipes that she used to get her health back on track. She posted regular updates on her cancer, becoming a well-known figure in the wellness industry, and even beyond that, she was invited to speak in front of Cosmopolitan magazine to inspire their colleagues and their readers to take their well-being into their own hands. Now, all of this sounds amazing, right? It sounds like someone who's taken their own struggles and turned them into a platform for good to inspire others to become healthier and talk openly about their wellness. Unfortunately, that's not the case because it was all completely made up. Belle Gibson never had cancer. Belle Gibson never donated a percentage of the profits from her books to charity, as she said she did. And instead, what she did was lie about having a terminal illness in order to appear inspiring to others and to build a platform where she could profit from vulnerable people who were desperate to try anything to combat their own illnesses. In a documentary produced by the BBC called Bad Influencer, The Great Instacon, which if you're in the UK, I would recommend watching it. If you're not, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to access it. But ex-followers of Belle Gibson discussed how her content had affected them, and everyone who was interviewed talked about how her posts had convinced them to abandon modern medicine and try alternative medicine because they were suffering with conditions which were not being cured by the medicine that doctors were prescribing for them. And one follower who had been suffering from cancer and going through chemo at the time of discovering Belle's Instagram page talked about how seeing Belle, who'd decided against chemo in favour of focusing on alternative medicine and clean eating, thriving whilst she was dying, made her frustrated with the treatment that she was receiving, and ultimately caused her to decide to follow in Belle's footsteps by stopping her chemo and following the diet plan that Belle claimed to have followed. And this shows the underlying problem with wellness influencing and the industry as a whole. People will create narratives that are compelling to certain groups in order to generate personal profit, whether that be through selling a lifestyle, a book, a fitness plan, or their own branded products. Ultimately, influencers need to make money from their platforms in order to sustain regular posting, so they need to have something that will make them stand out from everyone else. And in the wellness space, that means you need a compelling story. Belle Gibson is the extreme example of someone who just completely fabricated a story in order to sell recipe books and become famous. But I would always advise that you take wellness content with a pinch of salt, because the likelihood is that whatever that person is saying is exaggerated in some way, because it needs to be in order to grab your attention. And I think what Belle Gibson's story and success as an influencer proved is that we as consumers are not perhaps as skeptical about wellness content as we should be. We take what influencers say at face value and we don't question it, and that can be detrimental to us, not just because we believe made-up stories or follow unsubstantiated fitness or diet plans, but also because sometimes we place too much trust in influencers to have our best interests at heart, when really their platform is for them to share with their audiences whatever they think will make them money, not necessarily what they think will be best for the audience. And this became starkly obvious during the pandemic when 12 wellness gurus were responsible for spreading 65% of the misinformation on Facebook and Twitter with regards to vaccination and anti-vaxxing. And wellness, even from its inception, has always rejected modern medicine and conspired that Big Pharma wants to keep the masses sick rather than heal them by poisoning their food and poisoning their lives, whereas the wellness movement wants to do the opposite by detoxing all of those bad parts of society out of your life so that you can be clean again. So it was almost inevitable that wellness influencers who hold those beliefs would reject vaccination and encourage their followers to do the same. And a lot of wellness gurus base their content on kind of controlling what goes into your body and what you do with your body on a daily basis. And when the mass rollout of vaccination happened, they started sharing concerning posts condemning the science of vaccination and preaching about, my body, my choice, which, of course, that is true. And I'm going to say here, I'm very pro-vaccination. So if you are anti-vaccination or you're kind of neutral on the subject, then you might disagree with me here. But I think in a scenario where the entire world is in a lockdown and we've been told that the only way that we're ever going to get past this and be able to live normally again is if enough of the population gets vaccinated, I would trust the scientists with the PhDs who've spent their entire lives working on vaccinations over an influencer on Instagram who tells me that the vaccine is so that Bill Gates can track where I am. Over the course of the pandemic, the content that was coming from these wellness influencers started to get more and more radical. And one wellness influencer even ended up sharing the view that the mass rollout of the vaccine was equivalent to the Holocaust, because the general public was not being given the full information or shown the full picture and was expected to just believe at face value the ideology of the modern Western medical system, which I don't think that's quite equivalent to mass genocide, but we'll just move past that for now. And another one compared lockdowns to the conditions that Polish Jews were subjected to during the Second World War. I don't really know what wellness influencers' obsession with Hitler's war crimes is. And because wellness is inherently intertwined with health, these influencers began to sow seeds of doubt into their followers' minds using cult leader-like tactics, one Instagram post at a time. And they helped to spread the anti-vax movement so much further than it would have otherwise have reached on social media. They were claiming that the vaccines were poison, and those who were telling you to get vaccinated were just projecting their own poor health history and their inability to take responsibility for their own health by trying to bring others down to their level. And they talked about how we're only told that germs and genetics make us ill by people who are making excuses for not taking responsibility for their toxic lifestyles. No mention of actual medical science and how the immune system works. But Like we said, these people are not from medical backgrounds, so what they're saying has no scientific basis. Like, you can reduce your risk, but you can't ever eliminate it. And what they were telling you was that if you just did enough wellness stuff, then COVID couldn't get you anyway, which, again, not true. But because people trusted these influencers, and it's very easy to get drawn into wellness content because it always presents this positive image of everyone can do this, and if you do this, you'll live this perfect life, people were kind of slowly indoctrinated into having these beliefs that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And because of what we know about algorithms, you can understand how people who followed accounts like this before the pandemic and had previously shown no tendencies towards conspiracy theories could fall into being a conspiracy theorist, because once the accounts they follow started posting this stuff, the algorithm would start showing them more of it, and it would show them more and more extreme stuff to slowly indoctrinate them into more and more radical theories. Now, wellness and kind of far-right conspiracy theories are not two things that you would immediately put together, but they are two peas in a pod. And COVID is not the first instance of wellness proprietors spreading bogus theories about how people can avoid tragedy and adversity by practicing self-help. As an example, one author actually wrote down in a published self-help book that the victims of 9/11 were in the wrong place at the wrong time because of their own negative thinking and their negative outlook on the world. Not because of terrorism, because of negative thinking. Like, of course, if we just all thought more positively, we could eliminate terrorism for good. Like, why hasn't anyone thought of that until now? I think the reason that wellness gurus became the mouthpiece for anti-vaxxers was because of the focus that wellness places on individual control. They encourage you to take your wellness into your own hands, and that goes hand in hand with questioning norms and especially questioning traditional medicine, because that's the thing that society tells you is good for you, but you haven't actually made the conscious choice to believe that because most people don't have the time to actually study a science degree. Especially in countries where healthcare is really expensive, like the US, the phenomenon of conspirituality has definitely taken off, wherein the more invested someone becomes in wellness, the more easily taken in they are by conspiracy theories. Also in the US, pharmaceutical companies have a history of behaving in ways that reflect the idea that big pharma is about money rather than helping people. So, for example, the role of pharmaceutical companies in the opioid crisis, where they massively downplayed the addictive qualities of opioids in order to get people subtly addicted so that they'd buy more of their products, which it's pretty easy to see why people would think that pharma is out to get them. And it's also easy to see how the culture of hyper-individualism and capitalism that is rife and dominates the US, which is arguably the centre of the wellness movement, draws people in with the promise of cleaner, cheaper healthcare, then ends up sending them down a rabbit hole of rejecting modern medicine entirely. And it also thrives on what we just talked about, where people who get invested in wellness content are told that if they follow all of these steps, they will never suffer because they have control over all aspects of their life. Once you start believing you can control everything, you're more likely to get sucked into the conspiracy black hole and believe more and more outlandish things because you believe that you're kind of questioning the norm or taking back control from the governments and the experts who you're just supposed to believe because they're in a position of power. There are a lot of pushes from wellness influencers for people to do their own research and don't believe everything people tell you. But the research that they encourage you to do is not listening to medical experts with PhDs and years of expertise, because they're part of the healthcare system, so they must be out to get you. Instead, it's reading whatever you can find on the internet, which is, of course, the most reliable source of information. So people end up slipping further and further into things like anti-vax beliefs. And they feel like by doing that, by going against the norm, they are somehow more intelligent than everyone else because they aren't taking everything said to them at face value, and they've done their research to come to the conclusion that vaccination is bad because they don't know what's in it. I don't know what's in it, but I also don't know what's involved in a medical PhD, so I'm going to assume that the person who has one of those knows a little bit more than I do. And there's an ironic paradox here that people who follow a lot of wellness content will take at face value whatever their favourite wellness influencers say, but will not take at face value what a doctor says. And I do think part of that is because of the parasocial relationship that you have with those influencers, whereby it feels like you know them and therefore you can trust them more than a doctor you've never met. But also because those influencers are always preaching that whatever they're telling you is for your own benefit, and often they present their beliefs as kind of always having a positive outcome of you can live an amazing life and you will never get ill, whereas doctors are going to give you the whole view of the situation. They're going to tell you if something is not looking good in order for you to make the most informed decision, which again, coming back to kind of seeking comfort, having that conversation with a doctor is not comfortable. No one wants to have a doctor tell them that they're not well. So if an influencer is going to tell you that you are well, you're going to want to believe them. And I think this is why people in the wellness community easily fall into the conspiracy trap, because it's more comfortable to believe that by avoiding modern medicine, you will never get ill because you are all natural and you prioritize your health, rather than face the reality that the doctors are right. You can't ever eliminate the risk of getting ill no matter what you do, because some things just are not within your control. So finally, I just want to touch on how the wellness industry is actually the most prominent example, in my opinion, of hidden capitalism and consumerism. The wellness industry has only become as profitable as it is by selling you solutions to both real and imaginary problems. For example, if you are a person who is happy and content in life, you have great relationships with people around you, you have a fulfilling job, you're a healthy weight but not like a Victoria's Secret model, you don't eat terribly but you also don't massively restrict yourself, then you are living a fulfilled and happy life. But wellness content will target your weight and tell you that it's a problem. They will convince you to develop an insecurity around that aspect of your life and tell you that you can't be completely fulfilled because you don't comply with body standards, you're not super fit and lean, you don't eat the clean diet, which in turn will then just breed an insecurity that you never had before, purely because the wellness industry cannot sell you anything if you don't have an insecurity for them to fix. And wellness gurus in most instances do not promote what's best for your mental health. They can take a person who is happy and convince them to hyper-focus on an insecurity that they never had before, in turn worsening their mental health and their self-image, because without that insecurity, they can't sell wellness to you. You need to be insecure so that they can fix that insecurity, and usually they will try and fix it through something expensive like a fitness course or a diet plan that they themselves have curated with no actual science behind it, because as we said in the beginning, most wellness influencers do not have medical or scientific backgrounds, so those plans might be complete garbage anyway, but the influencer doesn't care as long as you buy it. Obviously, there will be influencers who don't do this. Chloe Ting springs to mind. All of her workout plans are completely free. Anyone who can access YouTube can follow them. She also has free meal plans to accompany the fitness plans, and she doesn't try and shame people into doing her workouts. Purely fitness influencers, I think for the most part, seem to be fine because they need to post free fitness content in order to upkeep their following. So influencers who kind of just specialize in wellness are the ones that I'm targeting here. There have been influencers like Belle Gibson who've been exposed for not practicing what they preach and selling fitness and diet plans to their followers that they don't even follow themselves. Rawvana, a popular vegan YouTuber, was caught eating fish on camera, and Bonnie Rebecca, another vegan YouTuber, revealed to her followers that being vegan had actually caused her and her boyfriend serious health problems, despite having peddled that diet to her followers for multiple years and built her entire channel off of it. Wellness influencers rely on their audience not fully understanding the science behind diet and exercise in order to sell them something. They will describe foods as clean and toxin-free or natural without ever actually explaining to their followers what those words actually mean and how they translate to better wellness, because they probably don't even understand the science behind it themselves. And the industry has created this myth that wellness is complex and complicated, and therefore you need to have all the right products in order to truly achieve it, such as expensive gym memberships, the right makeup and skincare products, which the ones they try and sell you will be way more expensive than a drugstore product, meditation classes, holistic retreats, even things like detox teas and vagina-scented candles, which do absolutely nothing for your wellness. The list just kind of goes on and on and on of all the things that the wellness industry wants to sell people under the guise of self-care, which, because it's labelled as wellness, makes people think like, oh, if I buy this, I'll feel better about myself, which in most cases a product can't do that for you. Wellness gurus put out the message that the more expensive a product is, the better it will be for your wellness, but really that's not the case, and wellness is not as complicated as it is made out to be. If you eat a balanced diet with unhealthy foods eaten in moderation, if you get a moderate amount of exercise each week, if you don't smoke and you do things that make you happy, you are prioritizing your well-being. You don't need to go to a spin class that costs £20 a session because they feed you multivitamins while you do it. You don't need to pay £120 for a monthly holistic massage. You don't need to spend £10 on a subscription to a meditation app. You just need to do what makes you feel healthy and what makes you feel fulfilled. Wellness is incredibly personal, not because you as an individual are responsible for every aspect of it, but because true peak wellness is going to come from living a life that makes you feel happy and healthy and fulfilled. And what that entails will be different for everyone. You know, if you are pursuing wellness, first ask yourself, what makes me happy and how can I do more of it? Then try and do more of it. You don't need an influencer to tell you that only eating raw vegan foods is the only way to achieve wellness and happiness, because only you as an individual will be able to know what your body needs in order to feel healthy. So those are my final thoughts about wellness, and with that we've come to the end of the video. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has stuck around over the last couple of months when I've not really been posting. There's just been a lot going on. There's been a lot of changes happening. As a brief kind of life update, I'm quitting my 9-to-5 job and I'm going to start the solicitor's qualifying exams in September. This course is notoriously hard. It has like a 50% pass rate and will require me to work longer hours than I'm currently working at my actual job. So for the sake of my own sanity, I'm not going to put pressure on myself to make weekly videos, because I just don't think that's a realistic target when this channel is a hobby and not my kind of full-time job. Like if I'm doing 9 hours of studying, I am not going to come home and do 2 hours of video planning and editing, because I'm just going to be so exhausted. So I would rather not kind of put the pressure on and say I'm going to do weekly videos when I don't think I'm actually going to be able to do that. I'm hoping one video every 2 weeks is going to be more possible and will give me enough time to kind of make a video that I'm actually happy putting out rather than rushing it. So videos will be more often than they have been for the past like 2 months, where I've literally posted once, but not as often as they were before that. So hopefully you guys are okay with that. There will still be videos, but I don't want to set myself unrealistic targets. So I think 2 videos a month, it's way more manageable than 4. So aside from that brief little life update, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like, leave a comment with any thoughts you might have, and subscribe to see more videos like this. I'll leave some other videos in the description in case you are thirsty for more. But apart from that, I will hopefully see you all in my next one. Bye guys.